Okay, great. We're going to get started. I'll just do a quick introduction before we hand it over to today's facilitator. So welcome everyone to Cadillac Fairview's Mental Health Speaker Series. We're really excited to be progressing in our 4-part webinar series that will focus on many different aspects of mental health and how to support your health as well as the health of those around you. So this series is a part of Cadillac Fairview's Occupant Engagement Program and will continue to run over the next 3 weeks, concluding on Tuesday, December 7th. Today, we have a registered psychotherapist and mindfulness coach, Larissa Dill from Mindful Momentum, and she's hosting self-care strategies, building resilience, strength, and well-being. Next week on December 1st, we'll have Kathleen McLean, who's a registered psychotherapist and life coach from the Psych Company, and she'll be facilitating the Coping Anxiety and Depression webinar. And then finally on Tuesday, December 7th, Nia from the Therapy Collective will be facilitating an art therapy webinar for us. Last week, we kicked it off with Integra Health on coping with the return to normal. So if you'd like some more information regarding the last 3 series, or the next 2 series, sorry, you can email courtney.laurie@cadillacfairview.com. That's the email that was contained within your RCP. And we'll be circulating an email at the end of the series with some links to a few of the recordings, as well as a short survey. So we just ask that you take a few minutes to complete that survey to help us continually improve upon the different initiatives that are offered. So with that, I will hand it over to Larissa and she'll get us started.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy that you're here, and I'm happy to be here as well. It's really encouraging. I've been mentioning to Courtney and Jen that encouraging that people are willing to sign up for these and your interest in it. To give you a little bit about my background, thank you, Courtney, for the introduction. Yes, I have trained in psychology and worked as a registered psychotherapist for many years, working individually with people. And then I also wanted to branch out a little bit to do more of these types of talks so it can reach a broader audience. And if you could just switch to the next slide. Before I go a little bit further into these introductions, what I'd like to do is ask you to participate in a little bit of a reflection. First, if you have a pen and a paper with you, that would be helpful to make a few notes to yourself. But since this topic is about self-care, I want to see what it is that we all define as caring in general. Before we get into the more complicated topic of what of caring for ourselves, let's just talk about what is caring. So take a moment and settle into your own space and take a few breaths and see if you can relax any tension. And for a moment, bring to mind a situation where you were in a situation of receiving care from a friend. And when you felt that they really heard you and listened to you. And play it out in your mind a little bit like a movie. And what do you notice about what that feels like? What are the real specifics about what that feels like? Do you feel it in sensations in your body? Is there kind of a flavor of your thinking? What is it like when you're in that presence of someone who's, really, really caring for you? And then just make a post-it note of that, and then switch to another scenario where you are feeling a deep sense of caring for another person. What is that like for you when you're feeling a deep sense of caring for someone that is dear to you? Maybe they've had a hard time and you're trying to empathize with them, or maybe they're actually having a great time and you're sharing the joy with them. But call that image to mind and see what else you notice about it. A sense of sensations in your body, maybe. There might be, a particular type of thinking that you're going, that's happened, particular types of thoughts that are happening for you. And then if you want, make a note about that to yourself. So I'd like to ask people, before we dive in, is maybe they could chat a little bit in the chat box, and say something about, just say one or two words about what was really important to you about those feelings of caring, either caring for another or caring or receiving caring from someone. What are the just bullet words, like one or two words? What did you notice that is the idea of caring for you? So I'm going to try and see if I can see the chat box, and if anybody could just start popping in the words, and then we can all see them. Yeah. Feeling of safety, providing safety for another. I really like that reference to safety. Absolutely. So something about caring is really about finding that safety, checking in. Yes, no judgment. Feelings of trust, relief. Yes, we need relief. Connection, acknowledged and heard. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we all know what these feelings are, but there's something about it that makes it difficult for us when we're directing it back towards ourselves. And I'm presuming we all know that difficulty because, I teach these programs and you've signed up for a program with it about self-care for yourself. But we have it in us. We absolutely have it in us. It comes quite easily and naturally when I presented those types of situations to you. So caring is caring, but what happens is there's obstacles that get in the way. And then for the next slide, I will get into some of these obstacles. But first, besides stating the obvious, why do we want to understand more about self-care? It's not just about like kind of some selfish need that we are having, or it's frivolous or indulgent. We know from a lot of research, psychological research, that feelings of caring are very good for our health. And there's been a lot of experiments that have been done with this. There's been research with people who have participated in 6-week programs where they're practicing daily these reflections of caring towards themselves and caring towards others. And they've noticed, a post-experiment that actually these people have improved physiological markers of health, like their heart rate variability, their cortisol levels, their stress levels. There's also one that shows that it affects the telomeres, which are the parts of the cell that are ones that kind of indicate aging, how quickly we're aging. And then there's also so many studies that have been done that show that with this practice of cultivating these feelings of caring both towards others and towards ourselves, that it absolutely improves relationships. That's a little bit obvious, but what's interesting about the improvement in relations and social connections is that turns into a little bit of a spiral. We feel better about our relationships, we're more motivated to do things, and we're generally speaking happier in life. And then it spirals upwards from there. And so actually, I'm going to tell you one particular experiment that I think most people will find really relevant. If we could click to the next slide. There was a study that was done called the What the Hell Effect. And what the researchers wanted to do was to see what kind of impacts on behavior choices could these self-care attitudes that have on, things like eating or diet choices. And so they had a lot of women who are an undergraduate. They took them into a room and they asked them to eat a whole bunch of donuts and then quickly gulp down a bunch of water to make them feel especially full. But then what they did is they split the group into two. And one group went into a room and they were presented with the candies, these two different trays that you see on the slide, and also with vegetables. yeah, the vegetables and the candies. And they said, go ahead, eat whatever you want. Yeah, I know you're full already, but just go ahead and eat as much as you can. Sample each one of these trays. And then the other group, they actually took them into the same room, but before they went into the room, they coached them on this self-kindness of being kind to themselves. And they said things to them like, it's okay. This is hard. Everybody kind of falls off the rail sometimes. Try not to be too hard on yourself and just do your best. And so they sent those people into the room and offered them the two different trays. And what they found, very quite astonishingly, that the women who had received the coaching of self-kindness towards themselves ate 50% less of the candy tray. And so I think that was like a very direct connection about how do we speak to ourselves that actually makes a big difference. And so for the next slide, where this comes from is a person that I studied with in a teacher training program, Kristen Neff, self-compassion, mindful self-compassion. Some of you may have heard of it, and it's in the resource section that we'll send out afterwards. But there's really three different components to her program. And the main component is what's called balanced awareness. We can switch to the next slide. Yeah, there's three different components, and that how would we apply compassion to ourselves in a difficult time. And the first part of it is just to have a sense of balanced awareness. In other words, we're not getting caught up in this kind of tunnel vision, of what the situation is and the explanations of it and who might be to blame, and what we can do to fix it. We're not kind of caught up so much in our head. We're just having a balanced awareness, slightly stepping back from it to say, oh, this is happening and I'm feeling X. And then the second part of step two of self-compassion in her model is that we have a feeling of not necessarily being alone with it all. We, which often leads to sort of a self-pity type of thing. Oh my God, I'm the only one that this is happening to. Or it leads to a lot of self-criticism. In other words, like, oh, I always do this. Nobody else does it. But when we have an appreciation that, to be human is to be imperfect, and that these are things that many people have experienced, not necessarily because of the circumstances, because of the feelings. We all know what it's like to have difficulties and challenges and disappointments and frustrations. And then the final step, what Kristen Neff talks about, is just that ability to talk to ourselves the same way we would talk to a friend. Like, how many times have you caught yourself, calling yourself names, when something difficult comes up, and in ways that, I know myself, I would never speak to another person in that way. So one of her practices, what I really encourage you to do, is to delve into the resources at the end of this program, which is to write a compassionate letter to yourself, which picks up on all of these points. So if you could just go to the next slide, there's a little bit of an overview on that. What you would do to begin with, you might take some notes here right now, if something might pop into mind. What you would do is you would think of somebody, a dear friend, just like we did at the beginning of the exercise, who who's been very comforting for you. It could be a combination of images. It might not even be a real image. It could be a spiritual or religious figure, or it could be how you imagine your dog your favorite pet would say to you. It doesn't need to be a real person, but somebody who has some image who has exactly the words and the tone that you need to be comforted by. And then think about the difficult situation that you're in, and imagine what that image, that compassionate image, how would they just simply identify and acknowledge what's going on, like what was in the chat box? It's just a simple acknowledgement. It's not necessarily a big kind of explanation and story about it, but a simple acknowledgement. And then what would your friends say to you to remind you you're not alone, that there doesn't say anything, you experiencing this doesn't say that there's anything uniquely wrong with you. It's part of being human in many ways. And then what would be the kind words of wisdom, support, or encouragement that, you know, would be most helpful for you and most calming for you? So there is research that's been done that shows that people who have been in treatment for depression and anxiety, maybe this will come up in your next seminar, people that have been in treatment for that, you know, if they are given this exercise and practice it for 10 minutes a day over a course of weeks, there's a very significant impact on the symptoms of depression. So it's something to keep in mind. So a little bit about why do we get, thank you, what is it that, you know, gets in the way of our being compassionate to ourselves, or, you know, the self-care, the motivation to care for ourselves compassionately? We have a tricky brain. This comes from Paul Gilbert, who's a researcher in the UK. And we have really tricky brains. You know, they've evolved over many, many years, but at the beginning, the image here is just showing that, you know, we just have these kind of reptilian brains, and all they did was kind of keep us, you know, in survival mode. There were emotions and motives and drives that we had. And these are actually the same things that we share with our animal friends as well. You know, emotions, motives, and drives, and the basic function is to keep us alive, and that's it, and keep us procreating and the evolution of the species. But then as we evolved, our brains became definitely more complex. And we have what's showing here is the new brain. And the new brain does a lot of funny things, you know, that we're not always aware of. You know, it creates stories, you know, that can be good or bad. It reviews the past and it looks into the future. Again, that can be good or bad. It plans a lot and analyzes a lot. And it also creates a sense of identity. It's also the part of us that says, me, I. That is the other thing that the new brain does. And so with these tricky brains, we have to be aware of like how the old brain is still there and influencing us. Let's go to the next slide. So in Paul Gilbert's model, we have these different sort of emotion regulation systems. And so in this old brain, what it's there to do is either to protect us, you know, run away from the lions in the savannah, or it's there to help motivate us, like let's climb the tree to get the banana or berries that are at the top. And it also, you know, to have a sense of safety and contentment, to help calm everything down. And all of those systems are always working. But what happens is we can get caught up in much more in the top two systems, and we lose our skills with being able to foster the sense of contentment and safety. And that really does come from, you know, we're wired for that because that's how we survived. We were nurtured and soothed and comforted as babies, and that helped to kind of damp down the other two systems. And so what we can start to do is to cultivate an awareness of which system is in overdrive, and then what are the things that we can do to bring the other system into balance with those. So let's see where we're going now. What happens when we're in that kind of threat mode or the kind of drive and achieving mode is we tend to go into a lot of negativity. There's negative self-judgment that comes up, and it applies that we often get into these stories about how we're not worthy of care and attention towards our own needs, and we judge ourselves by all sorts of extrinsic factors, which is very society influenced very much by like social media and marketing forces. We're supposed to be look a certain way, or we have ideas and stories about how we're supposed to look a certain way or have accomplished certain things, and we feel like we're maybe not so deserving of kindness because we haven't made the grade so far. And then another aspect of it is that we might have the belief or the story in our mind. That's, again, this is all that new brain in that previous slide. We have the story that, to care for ourselves is selfish and self-centered. And we assume that, like, if we're doing this work of self-care, it's like excluding others. And we have some pretty big public figure images of people that have in history that have been self-sacrificing and and altruistic, and those would be images like Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, and so we really kind of might espouse to that idea to be very self-sacrificing is more virtuous than taking care of ourselves. And that's definitely tricky, because in Kristen Neff's work, she uses the example, and maybe some of you have heard this one already, is that, when the airplane, when you get on a plane and they're giving you the instructions about what to do for safety, if there's an emergency, the airbags will drop down, and you put the airbag on yourself first. So you need to have some of your basic needs met before you can help another. So always put the airbag on yourself first. It's something to keep in mind, about it's kind of a counter to that story that we tell ourselves that we're too selfish or self-centered. And the other story that we often tell ourselves is that it's too indulgent, that we cannot allow ourselves to have some of those softer feelings. Maybe when we're in need, we're tired out, we're exhausted, I can't allow myself to acknowledge some of these softer feelings, because I'll be vulnerable, or I won't necessarily be safe, or people will take advantage of me. So those are some of the things that that get in the way of being caring towards ourselves. So I just want to quickly stop and ask if anybody has any questions, like either in the chat box before I go on to the next section, or I don't know if you want to take yourself off mute or ask in the chat box. Anything that you're especially wanting to get to, or anything about what I've mentioned so far that's confusing. Okay. Okay. So when people are talking about self-care and wanting to take better care of themselves, a lot of it, we can switch to the next slide here. A lot of the times what we're all doing as human beings is that we're in the pursuit of happiness for ourselves, and hoping that, learning more about self-care practices, how can they contribute to that happiness? And one of the things that I think is important here is to understand there are two different approaches to happiness. And one of them is it's how we define happiness matters. In one case, happiness is more conditional. That the self-care practices that we do are very short-term or temporary, and they exist only when we're actually doing them, like taking a bubble bath, or maybe sports, or doing our hobby, or sitting down to a yummy meal. They're all good things to be engaging in, but they do end. The experience, the pleasantness of it does end. It happens in the moment, and it also depends very much on what the circumstances are, what the extrinsic factors are. And then another type of happiness was one that was explored quite a lot by Aristotle, the philosopher Aristotle, eudaimonia, which means that it's a type of happiness that is much longer lasting. It's based on cultivating our our values, our purpose, our meaning, and it's more like an underlining, it's an intrinsic type of happiness that brings a level of contentment and life satisfaction, because we're following our purpose and our goals and what's really most meaningful to us. And so I think the important thing is that a lot of times we mistake self-care for the very sort of fleeting experiences. And in fact, actually what we want to do as a very important part of self-care is to cultivate more of this self-awareness of what's meaningful and valuable in your life in the very long run. And what we can do, a practice that you can do to help yourself with this, is to spend more time reflecting on what your core values are. Maybe some people have done some of that either with self-help books or in conversations with friends, or even if you're working with a coach or a therapist. So values, if you haven't, values are important, but they're also very different than goals. And the difference between values and goals is that I'm going to go to the next slide. Here's a list of values that many of us, it's not complete at all, but many of us will espouse to it, and for many of us is a driving force in our life. But the difference between values and goals is that values is the journey, goals are the destination. So I might have a value of, values are also definitely more impersonal, and whereas the goals are definitely more personal and specific to your circumstances in your life. But I might have a goal of being financially responsible because I want to save up and be eligible for a mortgage so I can be a homeowner. And so that happens. So my actions are driven by that value, and I'm saving money, and I achieve the goal of being able to purchase a home. But does that mean I'm going to stop being financially responsible? That's probably going to carry on, certainly. And whereas the difference is that a goal is kind of the end, it's the destination. And there's some more references and resources for that. So there's an exercise that you can practice with this one as well. I think we'll go to the next slide. Having reviewed that, I'm going to ask you to take a moment now we can go back and forth between the slides if you need to see the other slide, but this is what I'm going to ask you to do for about 4 minutes here, is to take a moment and name what your top 10 values are. And we can go back to the slides so that you can pick them out. Yeah. And then from that, I'm going to ask you to choose half, 5. Just choose 5 of them that are most important. It might be really hard to rule some of them out, but the question is really, which ones are most driving your life right now? Which ones are motivating you in your day-to-day actions? So maybe think about specific situations where, it's been difficult for you, but you know that this is a principle or a value, a driving principle and value in your life that, gives you enough motivation and energy to do it. An example I use is when I used to be involved in a carpool when I was getting my kids to school. And, whatever, Wednesday was my day, and I was always a little bit grumpy about it. Didn't really want to be part of this carpool and be inconvenienced. But I always tried to come back to this value that I had, that around, the school that my kids were going to was out of district, and it had to do with the principles and values that I had around the type of education that I wanted to offer them. So yeah, it was one of those kind of daily hassles that, is not so pleasant, but connecting and reminding myself of the value is definitely what helped me to kind of continue with that. It was my reason why. So think about some situations in your life where your values, these top 5 values, have supported you and helped you get through a difficult time, or just by reminding you of what really matters. And then another situation you might consider is, are there some values that you have maybe put on the back burner that you want to bring into play a little bit more in your daily choices and actions? And what would that look like? What are the values that you've put on the back burner that you want to sort of come to life and support you, and for you to be able to remember those better so that you can kind of connect with the why, the big why. Why am I doing this? Even if it's hard and difficult, why am I doing this? And keeping in mind that difference between values and goals, right? The values, if you will feel really deep. The goals will feel like kind of a step, a completion. But the goals really are just representing the values that you held on the journey. So I think what's really important, I don't have a slide for this, but so you can keep looking at those values and reflecting on them. But I think what's really important to notice here is that these kinds of reflections are the self-care. And I think a mission when I was creating this presentation was to help you with that, because there's seems to be such a misnomer about self-care, that it's about taking time for meditation or a bubble bath or, I don't know, shopping or getting new stuff. And I think that that's very much driven by, the market economy that we're in. That there's something about us that we need to fix, and we can do it immediately by, X, and we get distracted very easily. But taking time for these reflections and cultivating the self-awareness about what really matters for us is itself a very, very deliberate and dedicated form of self-care. And so you might not be in the circumstances where you can, take off from your desk and go meditate a little bit. But what you can do is, check in with yourself about, like, okay, in what sense are my actions here aligned with a bigger purpose and a bigger value that is very meaningful to me and is going to contribute to sort of a bigger feeling of life satisfaction. And when the other part is that, I think this is a part that most people want to get into, is how, when we do have this clear sense of our purpose, our mission, and our values, because we spent the time to reflect on it or make notes to ourselves or talk to friends about it, when we are clear about that, it's our needs and our personal emotional needs are a little bit easier to communicate, and we will communicate much more effectively when we have an understanding and appreciation of our own emotions, and we're not criticizing ourselves for, oh, I feel this, I feel that. We're not criticizing ourselves. We're feeling more confident with whatever it is that's coming up. And so it's less difficult for us to be able to communicate with others. And we also might feel quite a bit less resentment towards other people, because we feel that we can communicate peacefully with them, and they might be a little bit more responsive to us if we can communicate clearly what it is that's going on. So we can also set our boundaries a little bit better, because it's very clear that resources are limited, and we do need to protect ourselves in terms of our inner resources, and that's a part of self-care as well. But we need to be able to skillfully communicate that with others. So we'll go to the next slide, and I'm going to introduce you to a concept of what's called nonviolent communication. Again, this will be in the resources. And nonviolent communication is basically a way of being able to, first of all, it's got four parts to it. It's got the, what you do is you observe the situation. Here's a quick example. My kids are always leaving their socks on the floor, and it was really bothering me, and it was going on and on and on over and over and over again, and it was really bothering me, and I noticed myself getting like really kind of ratcheted up about it. And so the first thing that you do, you go through this process yourself, is just like, hey, I'm noticing that the socks are on the floor. It's a flat out fact. It's got no interpretation or judgment or anything. But then identifying the feelings, and identifying the feelings is like, I'm feeling agitated. Okay, it's not about I'm feeling disrespected. That's about the other person. It's about what I'm feeling. I'm feeling agitated. And then identifying for myself before I communicate anything, what is the need? There's a need of mine that's not being met here. And for me, the need was that, I know that when I have visual spaciousness and things that are sort of out of my visual field, then I definitely feel a lot more at peace. So I feel, that was a need that was not it was not being met in that moment, a sense of kind of ease and peace. And then from there, it made it much easier for me to make a request. And when we talk about nonviolent communication, it's a request, not a demand. It's based on what we've already recognized as our need, and it's not coming through an interpretation of what the other person did wrong. So the request was, I've noticed that, your socks are on the floor, and it really makes a big difference for me when I feel like I've got more of a kind of a spacious, clear visual field. And I wonder if you would be willing to kind of help me with that. So it's way different than making a demand. There's a lot of variations of this. I know we can immediately come up with the reasons about why that might not work. Maybe the person's not in a space, the other person is not in a space where they're able to hear that. But even if they aren't, even if you don't get the response that you want, having gone through that process of identifying your own needs is going to help you to feel a little bit more at ease and confident in what it is that's going on for you. So the chart there is just a very fast sort of cheat sheet about how you can approach this. You could thinking about how you felt in the situation, and what did you need in the situation. And then also, it goes both ways. Ideally is that you might be able to think about how they felt, and what maybe their unmet needs were as well. And I love the quote by Marshall Rosenberg, who developed this system of nonviolent communication, which is that all of our judgments are, including our self-judgment, is really a tragic expression of our unmet needs. And that from that, we tend to act not so nicely with each other or to ourselves as well. So this kindness, this reflection on values, understanding our own needs, giving ourselves a little bit of a break for having a tricky brain that will automatically latch onto the negative. Doing all of these things really are, in summary, the deep work of the self-care. And it's not easy all the time. It does require a certain amount of commitment. And this is where I don't know if I don't think I have a slide, but this is where I might encourage you to look into some of the research around habit formation. Habit formation, being able to kind of repeat over and over again these practices is really the way that we be able to make a difference in our lives, that a difference that actually matters. And I think that's where I would like to conclude. Lots and lots of resources, and I'm wondering if uh, we can put that in the chat box at this point. I don't think is it handy for you, Jen? So, see if I can
We can
find that.
either share the resources after Larissa, or if you have the link handy, you can
Yeah,
put
yeah.
it.
And then right now, what I'd like to do is just leave the last 3 minutes for any questions that are coming up, or chat box, or comments. And Anka, do you want to say anything, Anka? Is there any particular ideas that came up here today that inspired anyone? What do you, here's I'll make the question more specific. What is one thing that you will do, today or tomorrow, that was inspired, a self-care action that you are now feeling more committed to and that you will act on? One thing in your life. Call a friend, organize some books, sit down and journal. What is one thing that's motivated by a value? One activity that's motivated by a value that you see yourself doing in the next couple of days? Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Anka.
So I don't think people have the ability to unmute. So if any questions just come through, they'll be in the chat box.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Simply a pausing, I think, is really important. Just simply taking a pause and reflecting on maybe some of the ideas that came up here, or just simply asking yourself, what really matters now? What really matters? Okay. I thank you all for being here today. Certainly, if you want to get in touch, I'll have my information here available. And if you have any questions that come up from it, and I wish you well with, I absolutely wish you well with these webinars that are coming up. Like, as I said in the beginning, it's just so encouraging to see that people are signing up for this and just taking the time to be here at a webinar like this is already the best pause that you can take. And I wish you well going forward.